Can one girl with a book really change the world? The answer is yes, and her name is Malala Yusufzai. Welcome to World English Academy, where we bring real stories to life and help you learn English along the way. Today, we begin the incredible journey of a young girl from the Swat Valley in Pakistan. A girl who loved school, a girl who believed in books more than bullets, a girl who refused to be silent, even when her life was in danger. Malala's story is not just about one person. It's about all of us. It's about the power of education, the courage to speak out, and the strength that lives in even the smallest voice. In this series, we'll follow Malala from her peaceful childhood to the moment her voice shook the world. We'll learn new English words and phrases, explore real events in simple language, and discover how powerful stories can help us grow. So whether you're here to improve your English, learn something new, or feel inspired, you're in the right place. Get ready for a story of hope, resilience, and one girl who proved that even in the darkest times, a single voice can light the world. Let's begin. Malala Yusufzai was born on July 12, 1997, in a place called Mingora, a city in the beautiful Swat Valley of Pakistan. Swat was known for its majestic mountains, peaceful rivers, and fields filled with flowers. It was the kind of place where children played outside, families gathered in the evenings, and people told stories passed down from their grandparents. But Malala's story would be different. She was not only a child of Swat, she would become a voice heard around the world. From the very beginning, Malala was curious. She asked questions all the time. She wanted to know everything. She would look at the stars in the sky and wonder, how do they shine? She would see people working in the market and ask, where do these vegetables come from? Who grows them? If she saw someone being treated unfairly, she would ask, why? Why does this happen? Her parents noticed that she was different. She had a bright mind, full of energy and hope. Her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, played a big part in who Malala would become. He was a teacher, and he loved to read books and write poetry. He also owned a school where both boys and girls could learn. In a country where many people believed girls should stay at home, Ziauddin believed something different. Education is the right of every child, boy or girl. Ziauddin had grown up with little money, but he worked hard to become educated. He wanted to give his daughter every opportunity. He named her Malala, after a famous Pashtun poet and warrior girl, Malala of Maiwan. The original Malala had spoken up during a battle, encouraging soldiers to fight for their land. Ziauddin hoped that his daughter would also be brave and strong, and she was. Malala's mother, Turpekai, was kind and wise. She had not been able to finish school herself, but she deeply valued education. She supported Malala in every way, even if she couldn't always help with homework. She made sure Malala had time to study, to read, and to dream. Their home was simple, but it was filled with books and ideas. Malala often listened to her father talking with friends about politics, human rights, and poetry. She would sit quietly, listening and learning. Even when she didn't fully understand everything, she absorbed the passion in their voices. It made her feel that words could be powerful. When Malala was just a little girl, she began going to her father's school. At first, she would just sit in the back of the classroom, listening to the lessons. She loved the sound of pencils scratching paper, the chalk on the blackboard, and students reading aloud. She dreamed of the day she could be one of them. And soon, she was. Malala began school and quickly showed that she was a gifted student. She loved every subject, but especially science, languages, and literature. She read books in Urdu, Pashto, and English. Her favorite books were about brave heroes, strong girls, and people who changed the world. She was often the top student in her class. Her teachers were impressed by how quickly she learned and how deeply she cared about every lesson. She didn't study just to get good grades. She studied because she truly loved learning. She once said, "Going to school felt like being in a garden of flowers." For Malala, education was not a chore. It was a joy. As she grew older, though, Malala began to notice something troubling. Some of the girls she played with in the neighborhood stopped coming to school. One by one, they disappeared from the classroom. Some were told by their families to stay home and help with chores. Others were married off at a young age. A few were simply told, "School is not for girls." Malala did not understand. "Why?" she asked her father. "Why can't they come to school like me?" Her father would explain, "Some people believe that girls should stay silent, but we believe girls have voices, and their voices matter." Malala was angry, but not in a selfish way. She was not just sad for herself. She was sad for every girl who had to give up her dreams. She started to see that education was not guaranteed for everyone, especially girls. This idea, that girls were somehow less important, didn't sit right with her. It was unfair. It was wrong. Malala began to speak up, not in loud protests, but in everyday conversations. She told her friends, "We all have the right to learn." She wrote little essays and gave short talks at school assemblies. Her words were simple, but strong. "One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world," she would later say. Even as a child, she was becoming a leader. At home, her father supported her 100%. He never told her to be quiet. He never said, "You're just a girl." Instead, he stood proudly by her side, saying, "She is my daughter. She has a voice, and she will use it." Malala's dream was to become a doctor. She wanted to help people and heal them. But slowly, another dream was forming in her heart. A dream of a world where every child could go to school, no matter where they were born, whether they were rich or poor, girl or boy. She didn't know it then, but this small seed of hope was going to grow into something much bigger. The little girl with a book, sitting in the classroom of her father's school, was about to begin a journey that would reach every corner of the globe. And it all started in the quiet green valley of Swat, with a girl who loved to learn. As Malala grew older, her beloved Swat Valley, the place where she had always felt safe and happy, began to change. The beautiful green mountains that surrounded her home seemed to grow darker, and the calm rivers began to feel like they were flowing with fear. The peace that once filled the valley was now interrupted by a loud and dangerous presence. This presence was the Taliban, a violent group that came into power, bringing with it fear, violence, and strict laws that controlled every part of daily life. The Taliban didn't just want to control the land. They wanted to control the way people thought, the way they dressed, the way they spoke, and the way they lived. They forced everyone to follow their rules, and their rules were harsh. One of the most harmful beliefs the Taliban had was that girls should not go to school. They believed that education was only for boys. They did not think girls needed an education because, according to them, girls were only meant to stay at home and grow up to become wives and mothers. They believed girls should not have the chance to think for themselves or chase their dreams. Instead, they should be quiet, obedient, and stay within the walls of their homes. This was a belief that Malala could not accept. She had been taught all her life by her father that education was a right, not just for boys, but for girls too. She believed that every girl deserved the chance to learn, to explore the world with books, and to find out who she was and what she could become. But the Taliban didn't just talk about these ideas. They began to act. They started destroying schools. Some schools were bombed. Others were burned down completely. Teachers were forced to stop teaching. Children were afraid to even go outside, because there was a sense that anyone who went against the Taliban would face harsh punishment. People were afraid. Fear had taken root in the valley. Many families hid their children at home. Some girls were forbidden to leave the house, let alone go to school. The streets of Swat, which had once echoed with laughter and excitement, grew silent. The world outside felt like it was closing in. But Malala refused to be silent. Even though she was only 11 years old, Malala was strong. Her mind was sharp, and her heart was full of courage. She knew what was happening was wrong, and she could not sit quietly while it continued. She had big dreams, and she knew education was the path to those dreams. The changes were not just happening to the world around her. They were affecting Malala's own life. Her school, the one her father had worked so hard to create, was no longer safe. The Taliban made it clear that they did not want girls to go to school, but Malala refused to let that stop her. At home, her father, Ziauddin Yusufzai, continued to encourage her. Ziauddin had always been her biggest supporter. He believed that knowledge could set people free. He often told Malala, "The pen is mightier than the sword." He believed that words could change the world, that speaking up was the most powerful way to fight for what was right. His belief in the power of education and his love for his daughter gave her the strength to continue in the face of fear. But it wasn't just Ziauddin who supported her. Malala's mother, Torpekai, though she couldn't read or write herself, was a quiet but strong presence in Malala's life. She made sure that her daughter had time to study and read. Even in the middle of difficult times, Torpekai always encouraged Malala to hold on to her dreams and never let anyone take them away. One of the most significant things Malala did was to begin writing a diary. This diary became her safe place, her place to speak her mind and keep her thoughts safe from the Taliban. She wrote about everything: the fear that gripped the people around her, the pain of seeing girls no longer allowed to attend school, and the sadness of seeing the schools her father loved being destroyed. But she also wrote about hope. She wrote about her belief that one day, the world would hear her story and that everyone would understand how important education really was. Her diary was written under a pseudonym, a fake name, to keep her identity safe. The people who worked at the BBC Urdu, a news organization, wanted to hear the voices of young girls in Pakistan, especially those who were living under the Taliban's rules. Malala's diary became the heart of her message, and the world started to listen. At first, Malala was nervous. She was just a young girl, and she had no idea how powerful her words would become. She had never imagined that her voice could reach so many people. But when she spoke on the radio for the BBC, she did not hold back. She told the world how she felt about the Taliban's ban on girls' education. She spoke about the girls in Swat, the girls like her, who wanted to learn but were not allowed. Her words were simple, but they were powerful. "We are not afraid," she said. "We will keep studying. We will keep fighting for our right to go to school." She spoke with the strength of someone who knew what was at stake, not just for herself, but for every child who was being denied the chance to learn. As Malala's story spread, the world began to take notice. People from all over the world began to understand the struggles girls like Malala were facing in Swat. Journalists, teachers, and human rights organizations began to speak out, asking for the Taliban to stop their attacks on education. Malala's courage became an inspiration for many. Even with this growing attention, life in Swat became more dangerous. The Taliban continued to punish anyone who defied their laws. But Malala did not let fear stop her. She knew that speaking out was the only way to change things. Malala had always been a dreamer, and her dream was simple: education for all children, no matter who they were, where they came from, or what gender they were. She believed in the power of education to create a better world, a world where people were free to follow their passions, where girls had the same opportunities as boys, and where knowledge was something to be celebrated, not destroyed. When Malala was only 11 years old, the world around her began to change in ways that no child should ever experience. The Swat Valley, once known for its beauty and peaceful way of life, was now gripped by the darkness of the Taliban. People no longer felt safe to speak freely, to think for themselves, or even to dream. Girls were told they could not go to school. Fear was everywhere. The rules of the Taliban were harsh, and anyone who went against them faced violence and punishment. Malala could see the changes in her own community, and it broke her heart. But even in the face of fear, Malala knew that silence was not an option. She knew that if no one spoke out, the world would never know the truth of what was happening in Swat. And so, she found a way to raise her voice, quietly, secretly, and courageously. Malala began writing for the BBC Urdu, a news organization that reported on the events taking place in Pakistan. To protect her identity, Malala used a secret name, Gul Makai, a name she borrowed from a character in a famous Pashto folktale. Gul Makai was a brave, strong girl who spoke out for justice, just like Malala. By writing under a fake name, Malala was able to tell the world her story without putting herself in immediate danger. But even in the secrecy of her blog, her voice rang with truth, passion, and power. In her blog posts, Malala described what it was like to live under the rule of the Taliban. She wrote about the fear that haunted every person in Swat, the fear of being punished for doing something as simple as attending school. She spoke about the silence that filled the streets, as people were afraid to express their opinions or talk about the injustices they were witnessing. She described how girls were forced to hide their school books under their clothes or in secret places in their homes, terrified that someone might report them to the Taliban. She painted a picture of how the light of hope seemed to be fading in Swat as schools were shut down, teachers were threatened, and children were told they had no future beyond their homes. In one of her early blog posts, Malala wrote about the changes in her own life. "Our school was once a place full of laughter, where girls and boys learn together. But now, girls can't go to school anymore. Some have even stopped dreaming of becoming doctors, scientists, and teachers. They have stopped believing in themselves. Her words, though simple, were powerful. Malala was giving the world a glimpse into the lives of the people of Swat, who were no longer able to live freely. She described the pain of seeing her own classmates, once full of dreams, now living in silence, their futures uncertain. Her words weren't just about the struggles her family and friends were facing. They were about the future of the girls in Swat, girls who, like her, were determined to continue learning despite the Taliban's harsh rules. Malala's blog became a way for her to speak up for those who could not speak for themselves. It became her weapon against the oppression she saw every day. Though her writing was often filled with sadness, there was always a glimmer of hope. Malala wrote about her own dreams of becoming a doctor, of one day being able to help people and change the world. She wrote about the importance of education, not just for herself, but for all children. She believed that education was the key to freedom, to opportunity, and to a better life. In one particularly moving post, Malala wrote, "I have a dream that one day, girls will be able to go to school without fear, that they will be able to learn and grow and become whatever they want to be. I believe in education because education is the key to a better world." Malala's words were simple, but they were brave, and they were heard by more people than she ever imagined. Her blog posts were shared by BBC Urdu, and soon, her words began to reach people far beyond Swat. They reached families in other parts of Pakistan, and then people across the globe. Malala became a symbol of resilience and strength for those who believed in the power of education and the right of every child to learn. Despite the growing attention, Malala was still anonymous. The world knew her only as Gul Makai. But in her heart, Malala knew that this secret voice, this hidden girl, was not meant to stay in the shadows forever. She believed that the world needed to hear her message, and she dreamed of a day when the fear and oppression in Swat would end, and girls would be free to go to school again. Even though she was just a child, Malala knew that the risk of speaking out was high. The Taliban were watching, and they did not tolerate dissent. But Malala also knew that silence would never bring about change. She believed that the world needed to know the truth about what was happening in Swat, and she was ready to take whatever risk was necessary to make sure her message was heard. Her secret blog, written with courage and conviction, was her way of challenging the Taliban's power. It was her way of resisting their oppressive rule. Through her writing, she was showing the world that even in the darkest moments, there was light, there was hope, there was courage, and there was a belief that education could change everything. And as more people began to read her blog, Malala realized that her quiet voice had become something much larger. It was becoming a movement for freedom, for education, and for the rights of girls everywhere. Her words, once just a secret, were now a call to action. As Malala's blog spread beyond the borders of Pakistan, her words began to echo around the world. Her story became a beacon of courage, and her message, a call for education, equality, and freedom, began to capture the attention of people everywhere. She was no longer just a young girl writing in secret. She had become a global voice for change, an advocate for every girl who had been told she could not learn. With her identity revealed, Malala was thrust into the public eye. She began to give speeches, some of them in front of large audiences, others before influential organizations. She spoke about the struggles of girls in Pakistan, about the challenges faced by children living under oppressive regimes, and about the importance of education as the key to unlocking a brighter future. She was invited to appear on television, to talk about her experience, to share her vision, and to continue her fight for girls' rights. It was clear from the way Malala spoke that she was far beyond her years. She communicated with wisdom, clarity, and a bravery that few adults could match. She was not just speaking to the world. She was pleading for it to listen, to recognize the injustices girls everywhere were facing, and to take action. Her speeches were filled with the strength of her belief in education's power to transform lives. She didn't just want the world to see her as a victim of violence. She wanted them to see her as a champion of hope and change. Malala's message was simple but profound. Every child, no matter where they live, has the right to learn. She spoke with such conviction with such a sense of purpose that it was impossible for anyone to ignore her. And the more Malala spoke, the more people admired her courage. From global leaders to everyday citizens, people around the world were inspired by her fearlessness, by her ability to stand up for what was right in the face of such overwhelming danger. But while the world was cheering for Malala, there was another force watching her rise with growing hostility: the Taliban. To the Taliban, Malala's words were more than just the opinions of a young girl. They were an attack on everything they believed. The Taliban was determined to impose their strict, oppressive rules on Pakistan, especially in areas like Swat Valley. They did not believe in the power of education for girls. Quite the opposite, in fact. They saw it as a threat to their control, their authority, and their deeply held beliefs. A world where girls had the freedom to speak, learn, and choose their futures was not a world the Taliban could tolerate. The idea that a child, a girl, could publicly challenge their authority was a concept the Taliban could not accept. In their eyes, Malala had become dangerous, a symbol of defiance, a challenge to their authority. She was not just a threat because of her outspokenness. She represented something far more powerful: the possibility that other girls, other young people, would follow her example. She represented a world where girls could stand up and fight for their futures. Malala's courage had the power to inspire others, and that was the ultimate threat to the Taliban. They believed that by silencing her, they could stop the spread of her message and prevent other girls from gaining the strength to follow in her footsteps. The Taliban had already shown their willingness to use violence to achieve their goals. Schools had been bombed, teachers had been assassinated, and people who spoke out against their rule were punished with brutality. Malala knew the dangers she was facing. She was not naive to the fact that speaking out against the Taliban could cost her everything. But even as the risks grew, she did not stop. Her commitment to her cause was unwavering. Malala began receiving threats. They were sent in many forms: letters, phone calls, and warnings from people who said she should stop her public speaking. But for Malala, stopping was never an option. She had already come too far, and she knew that her mission was bigger than just her. It was about every girl who had been denied an education, every child whose future had been stolen by violence, and every community that had been kept in the darkness by fear. One of the most powerful moments of Malala's speaking journey came when she was invited to speak at the United Nations on her 16th birthday, in a speech that would become one of the most iconic in history. The world gathered to hear Malala share her thoughts on the importance of education. In front of an audience of leaders, diplomats, and students, Malala's voice rang clear and strong, filled with passion and determination. She told the world, "One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world." Her words were more than a statement. They were a call to action, a plea for the world to stand with the millions of children who were still being denied the right to education. She spoke not just for herself, but for every child whose dreams had been shattered by poverty, by conflict, and by oppressive forces. Malala's speech resonated around the globe. She became a global symbol of hope, and her message spread far beyond the borders of Pakistan. She was honored by leaders, celebrated by the public, and recognized as one of the most powerful young voices for education in the world. The world knew that Malala was not just a survivor. She was a warrior for change. But despite the recognition, despite the admiration pouring in from all corners of the globe, Malala was still in danger. The Taliban was watching, and they were furious. They could not allow a girl, a child, to continue challenging their power and ideology. In their eyes, silencing Malala was no longer a matter of stopping a speech. It was about crushing the idea that girls could demand an education, that girls could speak out and change the world. They saw her as the ultimate threat to their oppressive reign. So, they decided to do something drastic, something that would silence Malala's voice forever. It was October 9th, 2012, a day that started just like any other in the peaceful Swat Valley. But it would become a day that the world would never forget. Malala Yusufzai, the courageous 15-year-old girl who had become a global symbol of the fight for education, was on her way home from school. The bus ride should have been like any other, a small moment of normalcy amidst the uncertainty of life under the shadow of the Taliban. But that day, everything changed in an instant. As the bus traveled along its familiar route, everything seemed calm. Malala sat with her friends, perhaps chatting or thinking about her next speech or the next book she would read. She was known for her bright spirit and her deep passion for learning, a passion that had made her a voice for education in a time when education for girls was being ruthlessly restricted by the Taliban. But as the bus moved through the narrow streets, an ominous figure appeared. A masked man suddenly stopped the bus. In an instant, he boarded the vehicle, his presence sending a wave of fear through everyone on board. His eyes were cold and intent on one person. He looked over the passengers, then demanded, "Who was Malala?" The atmosphere in the bus grew tense. Malala, still young but incredibly aware of the world around her, may have known the danger that was closing in. She had been receiving threats for months, had been the subject of violent warnings from the Taliban, but never before had it come to this. The man's gaze locked onto her. Without hesitation, he pulled out a pistol and aimed it at Malala. Before anyone could react, the deafening sound of a gunshot rang through the bus. Malala was struck in the head, and the world seemed to shatter. The bus, which had been filled with the sounds of chatter and life, now stood in utter silence. Panic spread among the students and teachers on board. They screamed for help, calling for someone to do something, anything, to save the girl who had dedicated so much of her young life to the cause of education and freedom. The bus driver, in a daze, immediately rushed Malala to the nearest hospital. Blood was pouring from the wound, and Malala lay unconscious, her young body slipping into shock. But even as her body fought for survival, her spirit was stronger than anyone could have imagined. She had become more than just a student. She had become a symbol of resistance. And now the Taliban had made her the ultimate target. As the bus sped through the streets, carrying Malala toward emergency care, the world outside was starting to react. News of the shooting quickly reached the media, and it spread like wildfire across the globe. Social media exploded with messages of support, prayers, and concern. People from every corner of the world, young and old, rich and poor, sent their thoughts to Malala, praying for her survival. It was a cruel irony. Malala, the young girl who had stood up for the rights of every child to receive an education, was now fighting for her life in a hospital bed. The attack on Malala was not just an assault on one girl. It was an assault on the very idea that girls could have an equal voice in society, that children should have the right to learn and speak freely. Her friends, her teachers, and her family were beside themselves with worry. Her father, Malala Yusufzai, who had always been her greatest supporter, could hardly process the events that had unfolded. How could it be that his daughter, who had always been so full of life and courage, was now lying in a hospital bed, fighting to survive? Doctors in Pakistan worked desperately to save her, but the damage to her brain was severe. The bullet had passed through her head, causing extensive damage. Emergency surgeries were performed, but it was clear that Malala's condition was critical. The Pakistani medical team did everything in their power to keep her alive, but they knew that the best chance for her recovery would come from advanced treatment that could only be provided abroad. In the midst of the crisis, the Pakistani government made the critical decision to move Malala to the United Kingdom, where she could receive the best possible care. This decision was made amidst growing international attention. Leaders and citizens alike were praying for Malala's survival, but they were also fearful that the Taliban might succeed in their attempt to silence her forever. As Malala was transported to the UK, the world's eyes were fixed on her, praying that she would emerge from this nightmare to continue her mission for girls' education. As Malala was transferred to a hospital in Birmingham, UK, her family and the world were still reeling. The emotional weight of the situation was almost unbearable. Malala was in a medically induced coma, her body fragile and weak, but she was still alive. The question that gripped the world was whether she would survive, whether this remarkable young girl, who had inspired millions with her bravery, would be able to continue her fight. For days, there was silence, except for the constant hum of machines in the ICU, monitoring Malala's every breath. Her family sat vigil by her side, holding on to hope that her resilience would pull her through. The world waited for any sign of improvement, any indication that Malala was still fighting to stay alive. During this agonizing period, a global movement began to take shape. People all over the world, from politicians to ordinary citizens, began to show their support for Malala. There were tributes to her courage, petitions calling for greater access to education, and millions of messages shared on social media under the hashtag Pray for Malala. The Taliban had attacked Malala because they believed they could silence her. What they didn't realize was that they had ignited a global firestorm, a wave of support that would only grow stronger as Malala fought to recover. In the UK, doctors worked around the clock to stabilize her condition. Her brain, bruised and damaged, was healing slowly, but the road to recovery was uncertain. Malala's life hung in the balance, and every update from the doctors was met with a collective holding of breath. But Malala had never been one to back down from a fight. Her courage, her belief in the power of education, and the overwhelming support from around the world fueled her recovery. Slowly, the signs of improvement began to emerge. Malala's body, though fragile, began to respond to treatment. Her eyes fluttered open, and though her first words were not known, her family could see the spark of life still burning inside her. Malala was fighting back. The world was waiting for a miracle, and with every small sign of recovery, it seemed like that miracle was unfolding before their eyes. But what no one realized at the time was that this moment, this crisis, would not be the end of Malala's journey. It would be the beginning of something far greater, a global movement for education and girls' rights that would echo through the years to come. The story of Malala Yusufzai was no longer just that of a young girl from the Swat Valley with big dreams for education. It had become the story of strength, resilience, and hope. After the brutal attack, Malala could have retreated into silence, overwhelmed by pain, fear, and the enormity of what had happened. But instead, she chose a different path. She chose to speak louder, to stand firmer, and to fight even harder. Her survival was nothing short of a miracle, and the world took a collective sigh of relief. But for Malala, her journey was just beginning. The transition from surviving the attack to healing emotionally and physically was grueling, as it involved not only medical recovery, but also confronting the trauma that had come from that violent day. As she lay in a hospital bed in Birmingham, UK, recovering from multiple surgeries, Malala's body was frail, but her spirit was unbreakable. In those early days of her recovery, Malala's mind was constantly at work. She thought about the young girls she had met in Pakistan, the ones who were still living in fear, unable to go to school. She thought about the thousands of children who, like her, dreamed of a future built on education. But while her body was healing, the mind of Malala was already formulating the next phase of her life, one that would be more purpose-driven than ever. Malala's family stood by her side, offering unwavering support as she slowly regained strength. Her father, Jawuddin, who had always been a pillar of encouragement, stayed by her side, never leaving her side through the long days and nights. His pride in her courage and the resilience she displayed was evident. He had always believed in his daughter's ability to change the world, and now, even in her weakest moments, he saw that she would not only survive, she would lead. Doctors worked tirelessly to help Malala recover. Each step of her recovery was a milestone. It wasn't just the medical procedures that mattered. It was the mental and emotional strength she exhibited. Malala refused to be defined by the violence of the attack. She refused to let it turn her into a victim. Instead, she chose to see herself as a survivor, and her message was clear. Nothing, not even a bullet, could take away her right to speak or her dream for a better world. As her body slowly healed, Malala began to speak again. Her first words, when she regained consciousness, were simple but powerful. "I am Malala." It was a statement of her survival, a declaration that she would not be silenced, and a reaffirmation of her mission. As the weeks passed, Malala's voice began to grow stronger. She wrote to her supporters, thanking them for their prayers and messages of love. And soon she was speaking to the world, not from the darkness of a hospital room, but as a beacon of hope and a symbol of resilience. Her message was louder than ever. Education for every girl, every boy, every child. The Taliban had thought that the attack would quiet her, that it would stop her message, but it had only ignited the fire within her. Every hospital visit, every recovery milestone was broadcast to the world, and every time Malala spoke about her vision for the future, she drew more people to her cause. It wasn't just her survival that captivated the world. It was her unyielding determination to continue the fight for the rights of girls to receive an education. The global response to Malala's recovery was overwhelming. Leaders from around the world, from UN officials to heads of state, issued statements of support. Global movements for education surged, and the world began to see Malala not just as a victim of violence, but as a powerful agent of change. Her courage had transcended national borders, and it resonated with millions who believed that the rights of children, especially girls, must be protected at all costs. The hashtag Pray for Malala campaign became a massive symbol of solidarity. People from all corners of the world, men and women, children and adults, shared their stories, their hopes, and their prayers. Celebrities like Angelina Jolie, Emma Watson, and Meryl Streep spoke out in support of Malala's mission. Oprah Winfrey hosted Malala on her show, while former President Barack Obama praised Malala for her bravery. Even those who were once on the sidelines of the education debate began to understand the urgency of the situation. Education was no longer just a local issue. It had become a global cause. And yet, as much as Malala appreciated the support, she knew that her recovery was not just about global recognition. It was about the dreams of millions who shared her vision of a better, more equal world. As she began to regain her strength, she worked hard to ensure that her voice would continue to reach every corner of the world. Public appearances, speeches, and press conferences became her new battleground. But each time Malala stood before an audience, whether large or small, she knew that she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every child who had been denied their right to education, freedom, and self-expression. Her mission was no longer just to advocate for girls in Pakistan. It was a fight for every child who faced barriers to learning, whether from poverty, conflict, or oppressive regimes. Malala's fight had become the world's fight. She had transformed her personal tragedy into a global call to action. Through her efforts, international organizations like UNICEF, the United Nations, and numerous non-governmental organizations began to put even more pressure on governments to commit to girls' education. The Malala Fund, which Malala had co-founded with her father, became an important tool for creating positive change. It funded education programs in countries where girls were still denied the opportunity to learn. Malala was not just a spokesperson. She was now an advocate, a leader, and a driving force behind the global education movement. By the time Malala turned 16, she had already achieved more than most people would accomplish in a lifetime. She had received global recognition, had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and was already being hailed as one of the most important figures in the world. But despite the accolades and the attention, Malala remained grounded in her mission. Her passion for education never wavered. As Malala's health improved, her voice grew louder. But more than just her voice, her message grew stronger. She knew that her survival wasn't an accident. It was a sign that she had been chosen for something bigger. Her life had been spared for a reason, and she was determined to make every moment count. Malala was stronger than fear, stronger than any bullet, and stronger than any force that sought to silence her. Her mission was clearer than ever, to ensure that every girl, every boy, every child in the world could have the opportunity to go to school, to learn, and to build a future full of possibilities. By 2013, Malala's life had already transcended the boundaries of her small hometown in the Swat Valley of Pakistan. After surviving an attack that could have easily silenced her, she became not just a symbol of courage and resilience, but a living testament to the power of education as a weapon against oppression. Her memoir, I Am Malala, co-written with the renowned journalist Christina Lamb, became the vessel through which she shared her extraordinary journey with the world. The release of I Am Malala was a defining moment in Malala's life, as it marked the transition from a survivor to a global advocate for education. In the book, she not only recounted the harrowing details of the attack on her life, but also offered an in-depth look into her childhood, her relationship with her family, and the cultural landscape of the Swat Valley before the Taliban took control. Through her words, she painted a vivid picture of the peaceful landscape she once called home, a place where education was valued, especially by her father, who had always encouraged her to pursue her dreams, regardless of the societal expectations placed upon girls. But the book was more than just a retelling of her life. Malala's words were powerful calls to action, urging readers to reflect on their own education systems and their roles in shaping the futures of children, especially girls, in the world. Her memoir was filled with wisdom that seemed beyond her years, as she tackled subjects such as the importance of empowering women, the barriers that girls face in societies where education is denied, and the need for change. Malala made it clear that education was not a luxury. It was a fundamental human right that every child should have the opportunity to access, no matter their gender, socioeconomic status, or where they lived in the world. The impact of I Am Malala was immediate and profound. Within months, the book became a global bestseller, reaching millions of people around the world. It resonated deeply with readers of all ages, particularly young people who saw themselves in Malala's journey. People who had never heard of her before were now deeply moved by her story and inspired by her unwavering belief in education. The memoir not only brought Malala's personal story to the forefront, but also highlighted the urgent need for action to ensure that millions of girls were not denied the opportunities that so many take for granted. As the book climbed to the top of the charts, Malala became a voice for the voiceless. She no longer needed to explain herself. The world was listening. Her advocacy became louder and her message clearer. As she traveled around the globe to promote the book, Malala's platform expanded, and she was invited to speak at some of the world's most prestigious institutions, including the United Nations. In her first speech at the UN in 2013, Malala spoke directly to the world leaders, calling on them to honor their commitments to education. Standing at the podium, she shared her dream for a world where every girl had the right to go to school. She was only 16, but her voice was filled with an incredible maturity as she boldly declared, "One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world." This line would become one of her most iconic quotes, representing the idea that education is a powerful tool capable of changing entire communities and nations. Her UN speech brought her even more global attention, and the hashtag Malala Fund quickly became an important platform for funding education for girls around the world. Malala, with the support of her father and others, used the fund to invest in education projects in some of the world's most difficult and dangerous places. The focus was clear: empower girls through education. The Malala Fund became a beacon of hope, offering grants and scholarships to young girls who were being denied the chance to go to school. It supported local initiatives and advocacy campaigns, working in tandem with international organizations like UNICEF and the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, to create a global movement for girls' education. In addition to her advocacy work, Malala continued her studies in the UK, where she had been receiving medical care. While the challenges of recovery were still present, Malala remained determined not to let her experiences define her. Instead of focusing on her past trauma, she looked ahead, driven by her sense of purpose to make education accessible for all. She even completed her A-levels and later began studying at the University of Oxford, where she studied philosophy, politics, and economics, PP. Her academic journey was a direct reflection of her mission. She believed that knowledge was key to creating a more just and equal world, and she was actively equipping herself with the tools to bring about the change she so fervently advocated for. But even as Malala's international profile grew, she never lost sight of her roots. She regularly spoke about the importance of community-based efforts, emphasizing that lasting change often comes from the grassroots level. She continued to work with local organizations in Pakistan and other parts of the world to empower women and girls. The Malala Fund was committed to supporting girls in conflict zones, where education systems were often destroyed by war, political instability, or extremist forces. Through her tireless work, Malala helped highlight the importance of protecting girls' education in areas like Syria, Nigeria, and Afghanistan, where millions of children were still denied the right to go to school. Her advocacy was also focused on raising awareness about the barriers girls face, such as child marriage, poverty, and cultural restrictions. Malala had witnessed firsthand how these issues often prevented young girls from receiving an education, and she used her global platform to amplify their voices. In her book, she also shared the stories of other girls who, despite immense challenges, had persevered and succeeded in their education. These stories served as inspiration for millions, showing that with determination, support, and opportunity, any barrier could be overcome. In the years following the release of I Am Malala, Malala became not just a symbol of the fight for girls' education, but also a global leader in the peace movement. In 2014, At the age of 17, Malala was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, becoming the youngest recipient in history. This prestigious honor solidified her place as one of the most influential figures in global education and human rights. But despite the accolades, Malala remained humble, always redirecting attention to the work still to be done. She saw her Nobel Prize not as the culmination of her journey, but as a new beginning, one that would propel her even further into the fight for global education equality. In 2014, at just 17 years old, Malala Yusufzai became the youngest person ever to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. It was a momentous occasion, not just for her, but for the global education movement she had become the face of. The announcement of the award was a powerful testament to her incredible courage and tireless work in advocating for girls' education around the world. When Malala received the Nobel Peace Prize, she did so with a deep sense of responsibility, not for her own accomplishments, but for the millions of children whose dreams were still being stifled because they were denied access to education. She accepted the prize on behalf of every child who was denied the right to learn, and especially for the girls who, like her, had faced unimaginable obstacles simply for wanting an education. Her message was clear: education is the key to changing the world. Standing before the Nobel Committee in Oslo, Malala's speech was filled with humility, strength, and hope. She spoke not with anger or bitterness about the Taliban attack that had nearly claimed her life, but with a renewed sense of purpose. In her words, she said, "I am not a lone voice. I am not the only one. There are many girls who are struggling and fighting for their rights. They are the ones who deserve this prize." Her ability to shift the focus from herself to the global struggle for education was one of the qualities that made Malala's advocacy so powerful. Rather than seeing herself as a victim or a symbol of defiance, Malala always positioned herself as a representative of all the children who needed a voice. Her Nobel Peace Prize was a recognition of the collective fight for girls' rights, and Malala knew it was her responsibility to carry that message forward. The Nobel Peace Prize brought unprecedented attention to Malala's cause. The world had watched her journey with awe, from the young girl who had spoken out about education under Taliban rule to the courageous teenager who had survived an assassination attempt. Now, with the weight of this prestigious honor, Malala was even more determined to amplify her message and expand her efforts. One of the key ways she did this was through the Malala Fund, an organization she co-founded to help girls around the world get the education they deserved. The Malala Fund's mission was to ensure 12 years of free, quality education for every girl, no matter where she lived or what challenges she faced. The organization worked to empower girls and give them access to education, especially in regions where the barriers to learning were the highest, places torn apart by conflict, poverty, and discrimination. Malala's recognition as the youngest Nobel laureate also provided her with a powerful platform to influence global policies. She used her newfound visibility to speak directly to world leaders, encouraging them to make education a priority. She often emphasized that education is not just about books. It's about giving children the tools they need to build a better future. She spoke at the United Nations, in front of global leaders, and in international media, all while remaining unwaveringly focused on the mission: no child should be left behind. The Nobel Peace Prize brought unprecedented attention to Malala's cause. The world had watched her journey with awe, from the young girl who had spoken out about education under Taliban rule to the courageous teenager who had survived an assassination attempt. Now, with the weight of this prestigious honor, Malala was even more determined to amplify her message and expand her efforts. One of the key ways she did this was through the Malala Fund, an organization she co-founded to help girls around the world get the education they deserved. The Malala Fund's mission was to ensure 12 years of free, quality education for every girl, no matter where she lived or what challenges she faced. The organization worked to empower girls and give them access to education, especially in regions where the barriers to learning were the highest, places torn apart by conflict, poverty, and discrimination. Malala's recognition as the youngest Nobel laureate also provided her with a powerful platform to influence global policies. She used her newfound visibility to speak directly to world leaders, encouraging them to make education a priority. She often emphasized that education is not just about books. It's about giving children the tools they need to build a better future. She spoke at the United Nations, in front of global leaders, and in international media, all while remaining unwaveringly focused on the mission. No child should be left behind. At the heart of Malala's message was the belief that education transforms lives. She reminded the world that education isn't just about academic learning. It's about giving children the ability to dream and achieve. It's about breaking the cycle of poverty, empowering girls to take control of their futures, and ultimately changing entire societies. For Malala, the Nobel Peace Prize wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. The prize gave her a larger voice, but it also deepened her commitment to ensuring that the fight for girls' education would never stop. Through the Malala Fund, she continued to advocate for funding education projects, providing scholarships, and engaging with local communities to find sustainable solutions to the challenges girls faced in accessing education. The fund's work focused on raising awareness and mobilizing resources to ensure that girls could stay in school, especially in war-torn and poverty-stricken regions. They partnered with local organizations, amplifying the efforts of those on the ground who were already working tirelessly to create opportunities for girls. At the heart of Malala's message was the belief that education transforms lives. She reminded the world that education isn't just about academic learning. It's about giving children the ability to dream and achieve. It's about breaking the cycle of poverty, empowering girls to take control of their futures, and ultimately changing entire societies. For Malala, the Nobel Peace Prize wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. The prize gave her a larger voice, but it also deepened her commitment to ensuring that the fight for girls' education would never stop. Through the Malala Fund, she continued to advocate for funding education projects, providing scholarships, and engaging with local communities to find sustainable solutions to the challenges girls faced in accessing education. The fund's work focused on raising awareness and mobilizing resources to ensure that girls could stay in school, especially in war-torn and poverty-stricken regions. They partnered with local organizations, amplifying the efforts of those on the ground who were already working tirelessly to create opportunities for girls. As she continued to grow in her role as a global advocate, Malala also began to address issues beyond education. She highlighted the importance of peace and human rights as foundational components of a just and sustainable world. She called for global cooperation to ensure that education was not seen as a privilege for the few, but as a basic right for all children, everywhere. Despite the fame and accolades, Malala never lost sight of where she came from. She often spoke fondly of her father, who had been her first teacher and lifelong supporter. Her family remained her strongest foundation, and they continued to stand by her as she took on an ever-expanding role in the global education movement. In interviews and speeches, she frequently spoke about the importance of family support in her journey, about how her father's belief in her potential was the driving force behind her own belief that she could change the world. Malala's Nobel Peace Prize was also a moment of reflection for many people around the world. It served as a reminder of the power of education to transform lives, and it reignited the conversation about what could be done to address the global education crisis. Her achievement brought attention to the importance of educating girls, especially in regions where girls were still treated as second-class citizens and where their education was often not seen as a priority. Her win also sent a message to the world that courage knows no age. Despite the fact that Malala was still a teenager, she demonstrated that even the youngest voices could make an incredible impact. Her resilience, determination, and belief in the power of education inspired millions of young people around the world to believe that they, too, could stand up for their rights, just as she had. Even after receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Malala Yusufzai never saw her mission as complete. In fact, she often reminded the world that the prize was not the end of her story, it was only the beginning. While many would have taken such global recognition as a moment to rest, Malala saw it as a sign that she had to do even more. Her journey continued, not with pride, but with humility, focus, and a deep sense of purpose. Despite the demands of her advocacy work, Malala remained committed to something she had always believed in: her own education. She often said, "I do not just speak for education, I live it." In 2017, she began studying at the University of Oxford, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. There, she pursued a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics, PP, a subject that has shaped many world leaders, policy experts, and thinkers. Her years at Oxford were not just about academic learning. They were about growth, reflection, and preparation for the responsibilities that lay ahead. She read great philosophers, studied political theories, and analyzed economic systems, all with the intention of using that knowledge to create a world where every child could thrive. Even while attending classes, writing papers, and taking exams, Malala remained actively engaged with her advocacy work. She balanced the life of a student with the life of a global leader, traveling the world, delivering speeches, and meeting with heads of state, all while working toward her university degree. Malala's time at Oxford deepened her understanding of the systems that shape the world. She gained new insights into the political challenges behind education reform, the economic barriers that kept children out of school, and the ethical questions about global inequality. This education wasn't abstract. It was personal. Every lesson, every lecture, was something she could apply to her work. Her education at Oxford became part of her toolkit, helping her speak not only with emotion, but also with precision, strategy, and depth. Yet, even as she lived and studied in the United Kingdom, Malala never forgot where she came from. Her heart remained with the girls in Pakistan, the children in Afghanistan, the students in Nigeria, the young refugees in Syria, and the countless others whose education had been taken away by war, poverty, or discrimination. She continued to speak their names, to tell their stories, and to advocate for their future. Through the Malala Fund, her work expanded across continents. The organization launched education initiatives in over a dozen countries, including Afghanistan, where decades of conflict had denied generations of girls the chance to go to school. In Nigeria, the Malala Fund supported local activists fighting against the harmful effects of early marriage and gender-based violence. In Syria, the fund helped ensure that girls living in refugee camps could still learn, dream, and hope. Malala traveled to meet these girls, not as a distant celebrity, but as a fellow student, a sister, and a listener. She sat in classrooms, listened to their hopes and fears, and worked with local leaders to create solutions rooted in each community's unique challenges. She understood that change could not be imposed from the outside. It had to come from within. Her approach to activism was never about being the hero of someone else's story. Instead, she used her platform to amplify the voices of those already doing the work on the ground. One of the most powerful things about Malala was how she turned pain into power. The attack she survived could have left her silent and afraid, but instead, she used it as fuel to fight harder. When the world tried to define her by that one moment, Malala gently, but firmly, redefined herself. "I am not the girl who was shot by the Taliban," she said. "I am the girl who fought for her education." That same spirit guided her in every step of her work. She did not speak with bitterness. She spoke with hope. Hope that the world could be better. Hope that leaders would listen. Hope that girls everywhere would one day wake up in a world where their gender did not limit their potential. Her voice reached world stages and quiet villages. She spoke at the World Economic Forum, calling for increased investment in education. She addressed the Canadian Parliament, receiving honorary citizenship for her work. She met with refugee girls in Lebanon, visited schools in Kenya, and encouraged young women in India to lead their own movements for change. Everywhere she went, Malala carried one message: girls deserve education. Girls deserve freedom. Girls deserve a future. But Malala also knew that change takes time. She understood that progress is often slow and difficult. In interviews, she often acknowledged the frustration of seeing girls still denied schooling. Years after her own story brought global attention to the issue. Yet she never gave in to despair. Her belief in people, in change, and in the next generation kept her going. She often said, "We realize the importance of our voices only when we are silenced." And so, she kept speaking, not loudly or forcefully, but with a quiet, persistent strength. The kind of strength that doesn't shout, but still moves mountains. Malala Yusufzai chose a life not of comfort or ease, but of purpose. A life dedicated to others. A life built on the belief that education is the greatest gift we can give, not just to children, but to the world. Her story continues to grow, not just as a memory of what she survived, but as a vision of what she is building. A world where every girl can go to school, raise her voice, and live without fear. Malala Yousafzai's story is more than a timeline of events. It's a living message, a message about courage, compassion, and change. It's not only about a bullet that failed, but about a voice that rose. Her life reminds us that real power doesn't come from strength or status. It comes from standing up for what is right, even when the whole world tells you to sit down. From a young girl in the mountains of Swat Valley to a globally recognized human rights advocate, Malala's journey has proven that you don't need an army to make a difference. You don't need to be a world leader or a millionaire. You just need to care deeply enough to act. And you need to believe, even when others don't. Her most famous words, "One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world," have become more than a quote. They are a call to action. Malala spoke them not as a politician, but as a student. Not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who had lived the questions. She knew what it meant to be afraid to go to school. She knew the sound of gunfire in the morning and the fear of speaking out. But she also knew the joy of learning, the strength of standing up, and the light that education brings even in the darkest places. Her voice began as a whisper, written under a false name on a secret blog. But that whisper turned into a roar that crossed oceans, climbed mountains, and entered the halls of the United Nations, parliaments, classrooms, and living rooms across the world. It was a voice that carried the hopes of millions of girls who had never been heard before. But perhaps what makes Malala's story most powerful is that she never claimed to be a hero. She never tried to be perfect. She often reminded people that she is, in her own words, just a girl with a book. She made mistakes, got nervous before speeches, and sometimes struggled like any young person would. And that is what made her so real and so deeply inspiring. Because if Malala could do it, then maybe, just maybe, we all can. The ripple effect. Around the world, Malala's story has inspired millions of young people to raise their voices. In villages and cities, girls have started their own campaigns for education. Some have started libraries in refugee camps. Others have spoken out against child marriage or marched for gender equality. Many say they found courage because they saw it in Malala first. Her courage became contagious. She sparked conversations in homes, schools, and governments about what it truly means to empower girls. Leaders who once ignored the issue of education began to listen. More funding was committed to girls' education. New laws were passed. Old traditions were questioned. And across the world, girls started to dream bigger. This is the power of one girl who refused to be silent. A legacy of hope. Malala's legacy is not written in statues or monuments. It's written in classrooms full of girls, in libraries with open books, and in the eyes of children who now believe in their future. Her name reminds us that even when the world tries to push us down, we can rise and bring others with us. And she is not done yet. Malala continues to build a future filled with opportunity. Through the Malala Fund, she invests in local leaders and helps communities develop their own solutions. She continues to meet with world leaders, always reminding them, "You have the power, but so do we." She is also now a mentor to many, encouraging the next generation of activists to speak out, not just about education, but about climate change, refugees, racism, and more. She knows that change needs many voices, and she's working to make sure those voices are heard. In the end, Malala's story is not just hers. It's a reflection of what's possible when someone refuses to give up. When one person chooses hope over fear, knowledge over silence, action over comfort. She showed the world that a single voice, no matter how small it starts, can shake the walls of injustice. She showed us that you don't have to be powerful to be powerful. And she showed every child, every girl, every boy, that they are not too young, too small, or too ordinary to change the world. So if you ever doubt the difference one person can make, remember this: one girl, one voice, one book, one dream. That's how the world begins to change. Malala's story reminds us that no matter who you are, where you're from, or how young you may be, your voice matters. She was just a girl with a notebook and a dream. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for someone else to speak first. She believed that change begins when we choose to stand up, even when it's hard. And now it's your turn. You may not realize it, but every time you learn a new word, every time you ask a question, every time you choose to speak with kindness and courage, you're making a difference too. Malala once said, "Let us pick up our books and our pens. They are our most powerful weapons." So keep reading, keep learning, keep believing, because the next story that changes the world might be yours.